Anyway, good morning and welcome. This is the Christ Central Devotional. We're in a series walking through Luke's Gospel. I'm Alistair Semple, one of the team, and we are going to go and have a look at the passage. Again, we have quite a long section of scripture to look at, and we're going to spend most of our time just looking at it. I'll read it through. You can see it on the screen. So Jesus returned to Galilee. This is north of the lake, which so much of the activity in Synoptic Gospels happens around. He returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit. He'd just been baptized by John the Baptist, and the news about him spread through the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues. Everyone praised him. This was a first flush of excitement, and you can imagine the possibilities, and they probably nearly all focused on, this is amazing. Could this be the Messiah? Is this going to lead to some actual change in our circumstances, which we've been under the heel of oppression for such a long time? Could this be the one who will usher in an age where deliverance happens? He went to Nazareth, where he'd been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom, hometown, place of worship, regular attender. He stood up to read, that's normal, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it's written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, he gave it back to the attendant and sat down. All of that so far is normal. The eyes of everyone on the synagogue were fastened on him, and he began by saying to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." And at that point, something of a existential bomb went off in that room. This was not just another person reading the scripture, trying to remind themselves of encouragements for a future that they were hoping for but not seeing. This was someone who said, "The scripture today is fulfilled in your hearing." Now that's that little phrase, that short sentence was shocking. Absolutely shocking. It's difficult to understand how shocking that was, but it was shocking to the people listening to it. Yeah, exciting potentially, but shocking first and foremost. It's a kind of, everyone's eyes were fastened on him before he spoke. He already had their attention. This thing has just amped it up to 11. There's a Spinal Tap film reference. Anyway, let's go on. Initial results good. All spoke well of him, and they were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. And then it begins to move. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. And we don't know what that means, but it recalls the history, and the history is always, family history is always important to the Jews. And Joseph's son, let's remind ourselves, Joseph's son, the carpenter, the guy with Mary, that whole thing, the illegitimate child, this is him. This is the one that's a strange thing. So questions there, which explains why he says to them something which looks a little bit odd after they've been all speaking well of him and they've all been hanging on his every word. Jesus said to them, "Surely you'll quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself,' and you will tell me, 'Well, do here in your hometown what we've heard you did in Capernaum.'" Essentially, the ground's already shifted. It's gone from this is amazing through to actually you've got to prove yourself to us because your pedigree actually isn't great. And the words are wonderful, but maybe you're not going to be up to them. Show me something. Give us some reason for the hope that you've just stirred in us, because we're not sure you've got it. Truly, I tell you, says Jesus, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. Well, that's got to be a truism anywhere. And maybe at this point they're sort of thinking, okay. But watch what happens next. I assure you, there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. So he reminds them of something that they know. They know well. They know part of their history. They know the prophets. This is not something of what's the story, remind me of the story. They know the story. They pore over these scriptures. They hear them read week by week. Yet Elijah, a big figure of hope, Elijah was not sent to any of them, not sent to any of the children of Israel, any of the widows in amongst that community who genuinely needed help. Elijah wasn't sent to help the needy in Israel, but he was sent to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. He was sent outside of Israel. He went to someone who didn't deserve what they were about to get and received. And then Jesus goes on to say, and there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time that Elisha the prophet was working, yet not one of them was cleansed. Only Naaman, the Syrian, and again, the people of God, passed over by the big names of the prophets of God to help a foreigner, to help someone outside when there were many in Israel who were hurting. Where's he going with this? I mean, this is not win friends and influence people stuff. All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, and now these are his neighbors. These are the people who've seen him grow up. These are the people who actually, they were accepting him. He was included. He was part of what went on. They got up and they drove him out of the town. They took him up to the brow of a hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. He had got them that wound up that actually the most likely outcome of this was going to be a violent end. I mean, all of this could have happened literally in minutes. I mean, this is spinning on a dime. This is, I mean, they say traumatized people can flip from being, apparently reasonable to suddenly in a very, very bad state. And actually, the whole nation's been traumatized by its experience over not just the decades or in their lifetime, but over generations. And then this curious phrase at the end, but he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Now, what we don't know here is quite how that happened. Was that a supernatural thing? Was it as simple as they came to their senses? In the end, it takes us a ringleader to lead the charge, and they'd led them up to the top of the hill. But had they finally started to think, what are we going to do? Are we really going to do this? Had they themselves just tailed off? Had the adrenaline just started to drain from the system? Anyway, we don't know. We can't tell. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. I think you could say this is the point that probably he leaves home. This is when he leaves Nazareth. I mean, it started so well. And we still go back to the start of that sermon and say, here's Jesus with the manifesto, which he was preaching. And it comes from the book of Isaiah. And so much promise and so much positivity. But he then says, the way that you understand God is all wrong. And let me illustrate this to you by people that you know well and you think you trust, but you can't make sense of what they're doing and why. So this morning, our thought for today, I thought this might be a helpful illustration. This year, thousands of men will die from stubbornness. No, we won't. We kind of know that's true. There's my thought for today.